Now for global business updates, Rotus Oddiri joins us. Good morning, Rotus.
Good morning, Dr. Bati. Good morning, Ayo. Good morning, Rufai. One of our viewers, I want to welcome you all to Nvidia Day. It is, of course, the Q4 2025 earnings due for the most valuable company on planet Earth, $4.4 trillion market cap or so. Although the shares have kind of struggled this year because there have been a lot of AI fears and so on and so forth, with Anthropic disrupting things left and right, and also the worries over capital expenditure. These guys, not Nvidia though, but the hyperscalers, your Amazon, Microsoft, Meta. Meta had some big news yesterday with Advanced Micro Devices saying that they're going to spend, I think, about 60 or is it 100 billion or so on acquiring chips from AMD. And AMD competes with Nvidia. Funny enough, the CEO of AMD, CEO of Nvidia, Lisa Su, Jensen Huang, they're cousins, right? So we'll be waiting to see how Nvidia performs. Their cousins doing very well. Both emigrated from Taiwan and just made great names for themselves. So we'll see how it performs, but its shares are only up about 3% so far this year. Coming to Nigeria, I got this wrong. I thought they were going to hold rates, but they actually did cut. Yeah, well done, Rufai. You did get it right. They cut it by 50 basis points to 26.5. So this is only like the second rate cut we've had since September of 2025. The asymmetric corridor, that's the band around the monetary policy rate, was left at plus 50 minus 450 basis points. And then your cash reserve ratio also unchanged, liquidity ratio unchanged as well. For deposit money banks, 45%, merchant banks 16%, and your non-TSA deposits at 75%. Governor Cardoso also shared that Nigeria's FX reserves, gross FX reserves, continue to rise. So we're at $50.45 billion. I think this is like a 13-year high. It says it's about 9.6 months of cover. He did point to the disinflation that we're seeing with inflation continuing to ease. So this is just looking at January, but you'll notice that on a month-on-month basis, headline actually declines, actually negative, minus 2.8. Same situation with food on a month-on-month basis. I always notice Cardoso is always particular when he's talking about inflation to look at month-on-month, which, it gives you a kind of a clearer picture compared to year-on-year inflation. But he talked about the deceleration. So on the whole, he mentioned the inflation trend. He talks about where the currency is right now. I think Shetima had a very interesting comment about the currency yesterday. That's Vice President Shetima. Yeah, no, but you can intervene when the currency is weakening, and you can also intervene when it's strengthening.
You're not even getting my point. For a vice president, you had no right to make a definitive point on the currency. It's seen as speculative. So you will have left it for the CBN to say anything about the currency.
The point he was trying to make, and I had a guest yesterday, it's a shame I would have played the clip for you, from Meristem Securities. We talked about the MPC decision, and he was saying that, look, listen, you don't want the currency to get to 1,000 naira per dollar, because the more expensive, or rather the stronger the currency gets, the more expensive your exports gets, which will impact demand. So what he was saying, essentially, that's going back to Shetima, was like, hey, listen, this could have actually been the currency would have been even stronger had it not been for intervention. Intervention basically is a revolving door. That's the point. But overall, accruing reserves, inflation is decelerating, stabilized currency. So are we now on a rate cutting path? This is the question going forward now, because now everybody's going to continue to watch, particularly month-on-month inflation. If we continue to see a decelerating trend, then I think I would be more confident, depending on how inflation moves and the currency and other factors, between now and the next meeting in May. I guess I'll be more confident to say that they might cut at the next meeting. But then Cardoso kept stressing that, the CBN is very data dependent. And he also had a very interesting comment where he said it's a collaborative effort. He was sending a signal to the fiscal side that, look, balancing out and keeping Nigeria's economy going is not just a monetary assignment, the fiscal side. And he also mentioned elections. He also talked about what's coming up next year, and how he reiterated something that he had said earlier, and that election spending is something that needs to be watched in terms of trying to manage, the impact of money supply, which brings me to this very interesting video that Vimbai shared with us in one of our WhatsApp groups. So Kenya and Nigeria both have elections in 2027. Anyone want to guess who's spending more money on their elections in 2027 between Kenya and Nigeria? This is the Independent Electoral and Boundaries Commission, the IEBC. So this was a news update where it says costly 2027 election. And it was just looking at the reactions to it in Kenya, very similar to exactly what you get. This was a tweet from someone that says 63.9 billion. 63.9 billion shillings is what Kenya plans to spend. That is the electoral body is proposing to spend in 2027. It says 63.9 billion. Why the exaggerated figures? The elections are coming with a new lease of life for Kenyans. Will it create jobs? Short term, yes. Then get realistic. How would you even arrive at this figure when the country is not serious about its institutions and they're not barely survive? So the same reactions, right, to it. So I said, this is very interesting. Who's spending more money? If you take a look at what INEC has proposed and what the IEBC has proposed, the figure for Kenya is 63.9 billion, right? Which comes out exchange rate to 495 million. Nigeria, the INEC is proposing 873 billion at an exchange rate of close at 13.55 yesterday. Is $644 million. So in absolute terms, yeah, Nigeria is spending more money. However, you have to go a little deeper than that, right? And please feel free to check my math. In terms of registered voters, Nigeria has about almost 4 times as many registered voters as Kenya, going by the data that they shared. So we've got 93.4 million. Kenya's got 22.1 million, going by the data that both of them have shared. Now, an election is like a concert. It's an event. And everybody who is participating has a ticket. In your case, it's going to be your PVC. You have to cater to the maximum amount of people that are going to be participating in that event. So you're going to use costs per voter as opposed to the entire population of the entire country, which is very interesting. When you break it down, Nigeria's 873 billion naira per divided by its 93.5 million voters. In dollar terms, if you want to smooth it out, it comes out to 9,343 naira per voter. That's what INEC is proposing to spend. Comes out to $6.90 per voter. For Kenya, it's 663.9 billion shillings divided by its 22.1 million voters comes out to about 2,891 shillings per voter. In dollar terms, $22 per voter. So Kenya is effectively spending 3 times per voter as Nigeria is, which is quite interesting. That's our update for today.
What you should also factor into your argument, Rotus, is that Nigeria has scale.
Exactly.
So as regards election spending and spending of disposables, the larger the number, the reduction in scale. Another example I'd have loved to give you was that of India. Per the electronic voting machines and all of that, because of the larger scale of India, they've been able to cut the costs tremendously. That I think the electronic voting machine, that where you vote on the machine, it counts and does everything for you.
Yeah.
I think the machine, they've now been able to reduce the cost to about $300 or $400. And it's so interesting that India produces all the machines in situ.
That was the next point.
So they produce all the machine in situ.
Which reduces cost.
Which reduces cost, but also provides an ecosystem and jobs for their people.
India is a leader in IT.
You get.
Yeah.
So that is also where Nigeria should be looking at. You get. Most of these tabs, they were going to couple in from China and the likes. We can make them here. We can get things to be able to make them here. I mean, we've got local brands. I mean, Zynox makes all those things. We can get them here just to be able to get the OEMs and get the parts here. So, and that's why I think we have not effectively maximized our potential. Because when you look at it deeply, Nigeria can actually look within, manufacture those things there, make it used to make jobs for people.
Yeah.
Secondly, as regards the court, yes, we might be going into a court territory, but it's also a balancing act. Because you see, a lot of this economy has been based on the strength of foreign portfolio investments.
True, that is true.
So when you start to cut, because it's very casino-driven, when you start to cut now,
foreign investors
too will now be looking for places for accommodation. That's also a problem. And also, the reliance on these statistics is also suspect as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah.
Because you are using a very heightened base year. And when you're using a very heightened base year, one of the highest base year peak ever in inflation in the recent memory, then the decelerating threshold is very amplified.
Okay.
But it might not be the reality on ground, and that's why we also need to be careful. And I think that's why this central bank has always been very
cautious.
dicey and cautious in terms of cutting. And these are things we should also be careful about.
Fair point.
All right. Okay. Thank you so much. Let me first of all start with the elections. Yes, I understand that there's an argument for scale, but it also exposes, of course, corruption because there are complaints around some of the line items, the amount, for instance, that's budgeted for food, and just a quick search around corruption index and where Kenya lies. Kenya ranked 130th out of 181 countries, dipping 32 points in 2024. So for me, the comparison would be around the transparency when it comes to election funding, because that's the same criticism that INEC has here in Nigeria. So there's an argument for scale, but there's also an argument for levels of corruption, value for money, how these elections are executed, kickback after elections based on lack of it being fair or free or credible. So that's that. But going to the MPC and the rate cuts to 26.5%. Yes, it might be seen as a win for the Tinubu administration. They're talking about the fact that we have now entered into the place of economic stabilization. We've seen disinflation in the last, I believe, 10 months or, consistently. But it's still historically high. So it still means that the challenges around borrowing realities for small businesses, mortgage financing, it's still there. So we might celebrate it, but we're not there. We're not even close yet. We're not there yet. So, it's good news that we've started to enter that cycle. Then another thing that even the governor himself highlighted was the impact of the midterm election, the elections this year, mid-cycle elections, and next year's election, and how that might erode a lot of the work that has been done with regards to inflation in recent times. So it's some things to consider. But, we still welcome the news, but still quite historically high in terms of, the
borrowing costs.
Borrowing MPR,
Fair point.
Okay, let me start from outside and then come back home. Now, the global economy seems to be on a firmer footing in terms of what we are seeing in the markets. In the United States, all the indexes went up, basically because of this, fact that the fear that AI is likely to disrupt the market, will be a bubble, the kind of success we have seen previously. Now it looks like that is not so. With advanced micro devices and meta platforms talking about a certain future deal, which resulted in AMD rising by 8.8%. So the other indexes also followed suit. So the market is healthy, not just in the United States, but also in Asia, taking the stock, the cue from what happened in Wall Street. Whether you're talking about Kospi, Kosdaq, Japan, Nikkei 225, or Australia's index, or even Taiwan, or mainland China, CSI 300. That's that about markets. Bitcoin also seems to have survived, rising by about 2.0%, going back to the 65,000 range. Now, to talk about Nigeria. Now, I'd rather talk about the fact, a statement, an economic executive brief issued by Economic Associates, which is led by Dr. Ayo Tereba. He is saying that, in fact, the Monetary Policy Committee was 2 years yesterday under this administration.
Correct, yeah.
And, Economic Associates wrote a report trying to see what has happened. It said that Cardoso, or the Tinubu administration, inherited liquidity crisis, instability in terms of foreign exchange, instability with regard to the Naira, all kinds of macroeconomic distortions. But that those distortions have now been addressed. And that we have had in 2 years under this current MPC a period of profound transformation. But that what remains is for the MPC to go beyond stabilization, correcting the errors of the Buhari period to what he calls normalization, which will be, sustaining the momentum that they have been able to establish. out of all the benchmarks, it was only MPR that was changed.
Right.
All other benchmarks were retained.
Place, yeah.
So you have 50 basis points, giving you 26.5. But those in the market will tell you that 26.5 is still very high.
Yep.
And perhaps that's why we have not seen the effect in terms of, basic realities within the market. If you go to the banks, by the time they add management fees, they add everything. The thing will go up to about 31%. And it's still a very high rate at which people should be expected to borrow. So that is the issue with regard to that. So there's still a lot of work for the CBN governor to do, and also for the Monetary Policy Committee to do. 11 of them attended that meeting Tuesday and Monday and Tuesday. So who else was not there? So attendance
is important.
It's important. Truancy should not be allowed in managing Nigeria's monetary policy. Thank you very much.
Thank you.